The year was 1951, and the night of October 24th had descended upon Harlem like a heavy silk curtain, luxurious and impenetrable. It was a Saturday, the kind of autumn evening where the air was crisp enough to see your breath, carrying the scent of roasted peanuts from the vendors on 125th Street and the exhaust of 1,000 Cadillacs cruising the Strip. To the pedestrians walking past McComb's place, the Flash Inn looked like a lighthouse in a storm of neon. The windows glowed with a golden, inviting warmth. The doormen, dressed in livery that would put Buckingham Palace to shame, stood guard beneath the awning, ushering in men in cashmere coats and women dripping in mink. Inside, the Flash Inn was not just a restaurant. It was the throne room of Black America. And tonight, the king was holding court. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat at the center of the main dining room, a glass of vintage champagne resting lightly in his hand. He was 46 years old, at the absolute peak of his power. He was laughing, a deep, resonant sound that rumbled through his chest and made the ice in his glass tinkle. He was wearing a tuxedo that had been cut by Mr. Giovanni, the finest tailor in Harlem. It was midnight blue, with a shawl collar that emphasized the width of his shoulders, and his shirt was starched to a blinding white perfection. But it wasn't the clothes that made him the center of gravity in the room. It was his aura. For the first time in months, Bumpy Johnson's shoulders were relaxed. His eyes, usually scanning the exits and the mirrors for threats, were soft, focused only on the woman sitting beside him, Mamie Johnson. Tonight was a celebration of their 3rd wedding anniversary. 3 years of standing back to back against the world. 3 years of surviving the post-war turf battles, the federal indictments looming over their heads, and the constant, grinding pressure of being the target on everyone's dartboard. Mamie looked like royalty. She wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered like liquid moonlight every time she moved. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the diamond necklace Bumpy had commissioned for this specific night. She sat with the poise of a queen, smiling at the guests, nodding at the toasts, playing the role of the gracious hostess to perfection. But while Bumpy was drunk on the joy of the evening, Mamie was stone-cold sober. The room was packed with the elite of the underworld and the overworld. There were judges from downtown who owed Bumpy their careers. There were Italian capos from East Harlem, men like Chin Gigante and Fat Tony Salerno, breaking bread in neutral territory as a show of respect. There were entertainers from the Apollo, civil rights leaders, and the captains of the numbers racket. "To the professor!" shouted Big Sam from a nearby table, raising a glass of scotch. 3 years of marriage. In our line of work, that's like 30 years for a normal man. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Bumpy raised his glass in acknowledgement, beaming. "Thank you, Sam," Bumpy called out. "And to my wife, who hasn't killed me yet, though God knows I've given her plenty of reasons." More laughter. Bumpy turned to Mamie, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper amidst the noise. "You happy, baby?" he asked. Mamie looked at him. She touched his cheek. "It's a beautiful night, Ellsworth. Everything is perfect." "I promised you," Bumpy said. "I promised you I'd give you a night where we didn't have to look over our shoulders. Look at this room. Everyone here is family or friend. The Italians are behaving. The cops are paid off to stay 2 blocks away. Tonight, we just get to be us." "I know," Mamie whispered. But Mamie Johnson had a secret. She wasn't just Bumpy's wife. She was his second set of eyes. And while Bumpy was looking at the faces of his friends, Mamie was looking at the shadows in the corners. She had a feeling. It wasn't a thought or a piece of evidence. It was a vibration in the air, a low-frequency hum of danger that only a prey animal or a predator can sense. She took a sip of her water, her eyes scanning the room over the rim of the glass. The waiters were moving efficiently, carrying silver trays of lobster thermidor and prime rib. She knew all the waiters. They were flash-in regulars, vetted by Junie Bird. The band was playing a slow, soulful rendition of Unforgettable. She knew the band leader. Her eyes drifted to the entrance near the kitchen doors. Standing there, near a potted palm, was a man she didn't know. He was small, nondescript, with a receding hairline and a suit that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a discount store. It was gray, slightly ill-fitting around the collar. He was holding a large, bulky camera, a speed graphic press camera, the standard tool of the trade for newspapermen. It was a heavy, boxy contraption, with a large flashbulb reflector mounted on the side. He was the photographer sent by the Amsterdam News to cover the society event. Or at least, that's what Junie Bird had told her earlier. "Press is here," Junie had said at 6 p.m. "Little guy, name is Vale. Checked his credentials, he's legit. Wants to get some shots for the Sunday paper." Bumpy had waved it off. "Let him in. Let the city see we're living good." But now, watching him from across the room, Mamie felt the hair on the back of her arms stand up. Mr. Vale was sweating. It wasn't hot in the flash-in. The air conditioning was humming, keeping the room pleasantly cool despite the crowd. But Mr. Vale was glistening. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot. He kept wiping his palms on his trousers. Mamie watched him take a picture of a councilman. Poof! The flashbulb exploded with a blinding light. A puff of magnesium smoke drifted up toward the ceiling. Mr. Vale lowered the camera. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the hot, spent bulb and inserted a fresh one. His hands were shaking. He dropped the new bulb twice before getting it seated in the reflector. Mamie frowned. Nerves? Maybe. It was a room full of gangsters. A civilian might be nervous, but it was his eyes that bothered her. A photographer usually looks at his subjects. He looks for the smile, the handshake, the moment of connection. Mr. Vale wasn't looking at the guests. His eyes kept darting toward the head table, toward Bumpy. And then they would dart to the clock on the wall. He was waiting for something. "Mamie!" Bumpy touched her arm. "You're a million miles away." Mamie snapped back to the present. She forced a smile, picking up her fork. "Just admiring the flowers, Ellsworth. They're lovely." "White roses," Bumpy said, "for purity and loyalty." He cut into his steak. The knife sliced through the meat like butter. "Eat," Bumpy urged. "The chef made this special for us." Mamie looked down at her plate. She picked up her own steak knife. It was heavy, with a solid silver handle and a serrated steel blade that glinted under the chandeliers. It was a serious tool, sharp enough to shave with. She didn't cut her meat. She just held the handle for a second, feeling the weight of it, the cold reassurance of the steel. The dinner progressed. The wine flowed. The laughter grew louder. At 9:30 p.m., the dessert was served, a towering cake brought out with sparklers. The room sang, for he's a jolly good fellow. Bumpy was beaming, standing up to shake hands, slapping backs. He was in his element. Junie Bird, Bumpy's right-hand man, walked over to the head table. Junie looked relaxed, a toothpick in the corner of his mouth, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "Great party, boss," Junie said. "Even the Italians are having a good time. Chin Gigante just asked for the recipe for the collard greens." Bumpy laughed. Diplomacy through the stomach, Junie. It never fails. Everything secure? Mamie asked, her voice low. Junie looked at her, surprised by the sharpness of her tone. Tight as a drum, Mamie. We got guys at every door. Nobody gets in without a pat-down. Why? You see something? Mamie hesitated. She looked over Junie's shoulder at the photographer. Mr. Vale had moved closer. He was now near the buffet table, about 30 feet away. He was staring at Bumpy. That photographer, Mamie whispered. He's acting strange. Junie glanced back. He saw the small man fumbling with his camera bag. Vale? Junie shrugged. He's a nervous wreck. I think Big Sam scared him earlier when he asked for a light. I checked his bag myself, Mamie. Just film and bulbs. He's harmless. He's sweating, Mamie said. It's a heavy camera, Junie dismissed. Relax, Mamie. Enjoy the night. Nobody is going to try anything stupid with half the commission sitting in the room. It would be suicide. Junie patted Bumpy on the shoulder and wandered off to chase a waitress. Mamie watched him go. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to relax. But the instinct wouldn't let her go. It was like a splinter in her mind. She looked back at the photographer. He had stopped taking pictures of the crowd. He was standing still, watching Bumpy. He was holding the camera in a peculiar way. A speed graphic is a heavy beast. Usually, a photographer holds the side grip with his left hand and supports the bed of the camera with his right. Or they use a tripod. Mr. Vale was cradling the entire box against his chest. His right hand wasn't on the shutter release button on the side. It was tucked underneath the body of the camera, hidden by the leather strap. Mamie narrowed her eyes. She tried to remember the cameras she had seen. Her uncle used a Graflex. She remembered the mechanics. Why is his hand underneath? And then she saw it. A tiny motion. Mr. Vale's finger wasn't resting on the outside of the camera. It was slipping inside a small tear in the leather casing at the bottom front. Mamie's heart skipped a beat. She looked at the lens. It was a large glass eye staring back at the room. But beneath the lens, where the bellows connected to the body, the leather looked stiff, reinforced. A memory surfaced from the war years, a newsreel about espionage tools. She remembered seeing a diagram of a camera gun, a weapon concealed inside a camera housing used by assassins in Europe. The lens hides the barrel. The flash hides the muzzle flare. Mamie felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't a camera, and Mr. Vale wasn't waiting for a smile. He was waiting for a clear shot. She looked around the room. Junie was at the bar. Big Sam was eating cake. Bumpy was laughing with a judge. They were all blind. They were all blinded by the arrogance of safety. They thought the walls of the Flash Inn were impenetrable. They thought the presence of the Italian mob bosses was a shield. They didn't realize that an assassin doesn't care about consequences. An assassin only cares about the contract. Mamie's breath caught in her throat. She needed to tell Bumpy. "Ellsworth," she whispered, leaning in. "Just a second, baby," Bumpy said, turning away to shake the hand of a local pastor. "Reverend, so glad you could make it." He didn't hear her. Mamie looked back at the photographer. He was moving. He was stepping away from the buffet table. He was walking toward the head table. He was coming into range. Mamie's mind raced. If she screamed, "Gun!" what would happen? Panic. Chaos. The room was packed. If she screamed, Bumpy would stand up. He would make himself a bigger target. The photographer might panic and spray bullets into the crowd. Or, if she was wrong, if it really was just a broken camera strap, She would humiliate Bumpy on the biggest night of his life. She would look like the hysterical wife seeing ghosts in the shadows. She needed to be sure. And she needed to be close. Just then, the double doors of the dining room opened. A hush fell over the room, followed by a collective, "Aww." Walking in was Elise. She was 3 years old, almost 4, a vision in white lace and ribbons. She was holding the hand of her Aunt Lucille. Elise looked like a miniature version of Mamie, her eyes bright with wonder at the lights and the music. "Daddy!" Elise squealed, her voice cutting through the jazz. Bumpy's face transformed. The gangster vanished. The king vanished. There was only the father. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He ignored the judge. He ignored the mob bosses. He walked around the table with his arms wide open. "There she is!" Bumpy roared. "There's the princess!" Elise ran to him. Bumpy scooped her up, lifting her high into the air. She giggled, kicking her little patent leather shoes. "Happy anniversary, Daddy," she chirped. Bumpy hugged her tight, burying his face in her neck. "Thank you, baby. Thank you." The room applauded. It was a perfect moment, the hardened criminal softened by the love of a child. Even fat Tony Salerno was smiling, puffing on his cigar. Mamie didn't smile. She saw the photographer surge forward. When Bumpy stood up with the child, Mr. Vale moved. He closed the distance from 30 feet to 15. He wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. His eyes were locked on Bumpy's chest. And now, Elise was in his arms. Mamie felt a cold horror wash over her. If he fired now, he wouldn't just hit Bumpy. He would hit the baby. Mr. Vale stopped about 12 feet away. He planted his feet. He raised the camera to his eye level. He was sweating so hard his glasses were fogging up. "Mr. Johnson!" Vale shouted over the applause. His voice was cracked, high-pitched. "Mr. Johnson, one picture, for the paper!" Bumpy turned, beaming. He held Elise on his left hip. He fixed his tie with his right hand. "You want a picture?" Bumpy called out jovially. "Make it a good one. I want this on the front page." "Yes, sir," Vale stammered. He took a half step closer. "The whole family. Mrs. Johnson, please." Bumpy waved at Mamie. "Come on, Mamie. Come get in the picture. The royal family." Mamie stood up. Her legs felt heavy, as if she were wading through water. She looked at Junie. He was clapping. She looked at the bodyguards. They were smiling at the baby. She looked at the photographer. His finger was deep inside the camera housing. She was the only one who saw the gun. She was the only one who could stop it. "Coming, darling," Mamie said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She walked around the table. As she passed her place setting, her hand brushed the white linen tablecloth. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't reach for a bottle. Her eyes locked onto her dinner plate, specifically onto the heavy, silver-handled steak knife resting on the napkin. The blade was serrated, 4 inches of sharpened steel designed to tear through muscle. Mamie didn't break her stride. She didn't look down. In one fluid motion, practiced from a lifetime of needing to be invisible in a room full of dangerous men, she swept her right hand across the table. She didn't just pick up the knife. She grabbed the white linen dinner napkin with it. She bunched the fabric around the handle and the blade, concealing the steel in a cloud of white cloth. She held it in her right hand, pressed against her thigh, hidden by the folds of her silver gown. She walked up to Bumpy. "There she is," Bumpy said, putting his free arm around Mamie's waist. He pulled her close. "Look at my girls. Aren't they beautiful?" Mamie leaned into him. She felt the warmth of his body. She felt the small, rapid heartbeat of Elise against her chest. She looked at the photographer. He was 10 feet away. The perfect distance for a point-blank shot. "Okay," Vale shouted. He was shaking. He knew he was on a suicide mission. He knew that the moment he pulled the trigger, Bumpy's men would tear him apart. But he had a job to do, or a debt to pay. "Everybody squeeze in," Vale yelled. "Big smiles." Bumpy smiled. It was his best smile, charismatic, powerful, relaxed. He looked at the lens. He saw a camera. Mamie looked at the lens. She saw a muzzle. She stepped in on Bumpy's right side. She positioned her body slightly in front of him, angling her shoulder to shield his vital organs. She tightened her grip on the napkin-covered knife. The handle bit into her palm. "Wait," Mamie said sharply. The photographer flinched. "What?" "The light," Mamie said, her voice tight, stalling for a fraction of a second. "It's too dark over here." "The flash will handle it, ma'am," Vale said, sweat dripping off his nose onto the floor. "Just smile." He adjusted his grip. He braced his legs. Mamie saw his tendon flex in his wrist. He was squeezing the internal trigger. "Okay," the photographer said. "On 3. 1. Mamie shifted her weight to the balls of her feet. She coiled her muscles. 2. The room seemed to go silent. The jazz band faded away. The laughter of the guests turned into a dull roar. All Mamie could hear was the pounding of her own heart and the mechanical click of the assassin's finger tightening. She looked at Bumpy one last time. He was so happy. He had no idea that death was standing 10 feet away in a cheap gray suit. 3. Say cheese. Mamie didn't say cheese. As the photographer screamed the word, Mamie didn't pose. She didn't smile. She lunged. The flashbulb never went off. Instead, the world inside the flash-in exploded into a singular, deafening roar of violence. Time, which had been stretching like taffy in Mamie Johnson's mind, suddenly snapped back with the force of a whip crack. One moment, the room was filled with the soft clinking of silverware and the low hum of jazz. The next, it was filled with the thunder of a .38 caliber round discharging at point-blank range, magnified by the acoustics of the ballroom. Mamie didn't hear the scream of "Say cheese" finish. She was already moving, her body propelled by a primal protective rage that overrode every instinct of self-preservation. As she lunged, the white linen napkin fell away from her right hand like a discarded flag of truce, revealing the heavy silver steak knife gripped in her fist. She didn't aim for the man's chest. That would have taken too long. She aimed for the machine. She swung the knife in a vicious, downward arc. The serrated tip of the blade tore through the leather bellows of the speed graphic camera, just as Mr. Vale's finger squeezed the internal trigger. Boom! The sound was not the pop of a flashbulb. It was the roar of a cannon. Because Mamie's knife had slammed into the side of the camera housing, the force of the blow knocked the barrel upward by 3 inches. The bullet, meant for the center of Bumpy Johnson's chest, and likely passing through the small body of 3-year-old Elise, went wide. It shrieked past Bumpy's left ear, the shockwave hot enough to singe his hair. It struck the massive crystal chandelier hanging directly above the head table. Crash! 1,000 shards of Austrian crystal rained down on the anniversary dinner like diamond hail. Bumpy Johnson didn't think. He didn't process the gunshot. He didn't look for the shooter. The moment the sound registered, his body reacted with the muscle memory of a man who had survived a dozen assassination attempts. He dropped. He didn't just fall. He curled his massive frame around his daughter, turning his back into a shield. He drove Elise into the carpet, covering her head with his hands, burying her beneath the tuxedo that had been tailored for a celebration, but was now serving as armor. "Down!" Bumpy roared, his voice cutting through the ringing in the air. "Get down!" Mamie didn't go down. She was standing toe-to-toe with the assassin. The force of her strike had jammed the knife deep into the camera's mechanism and the man's left hand, which had been supporting the lens. Mr. Vale screamed, a high, thin sound of agony. He dropped the camera. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the knife still sticking out of its side like a silver stake. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding hand, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't expected the wife. He had expected bodyguards. He had expected guns. He hadn't expected a woman in a silk gown to come at him with a blade. He reached into his jacket with his good hand, fumbling for a backup piece, but he was too late. The initial shock of the room lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then, the flash-in woke up. "Gun!" Junie Bird screamed from the bar. Junie vaulted over a table, scattering drinks and appetizers. He moved with the terrifying speed of a man who knows he has failed his primary duty and is desperate to redeem himself in blood. Big Sam, who had been eating a steak 10 feet away, didn't bother to draw his weapon. He simply charged. He hit Mr. Vale like a freight train. The impact lifted the small photographer off his feet and drove him backward into the buffet table. Crash! The table collapsed under their weight. Silver chafing dishes full of macaroni and cheese and collard greens went flying. Big Sam landed on top of the assassin, his massive hands closing around the man's throat before he could even draw a breath. "Don't kill him!" Bumpy's voice roared from the floor. Bumpy was pushing himself up to his knees, one hand still pressing Elise's head to the carpet. His face was pale, his eyes wild. He looked at the chaos. He looked at the shattered chandelier. And then he looked at his wife. Mamie was standing alone in the center of the wreckage. Her chest was heaving. Her silver gown was splattered with drops of blood, not hers, but the assassin's. Her hand was empty, still clenched in the shape of the knife handle. She was staring at the fallen camera, trembling violently. The room was pandemonium. Women were screaming, diving under tables. The Italian mob bosses, Chin Gigante and Fat Tony, were on their feet, their own bodyguards forming protective circles around them, guns drawn, scanning the room for a second shooter. "Nobody moves," Junie Bird shouted, pulling his .45 and aiming it at the ceiling. "Nobody leaves this room. Lock the doors." The flash-in transformed from a banquet hall into a fortress. The doorman slammed the heavy oak doors shut and threw the deadbolts. The band had fled the stage. The waiters were cowering in the kitchen entrance. Bumpy stood up fully. He pulled Elise up with him. The little girl was crying, a terrified, muffled sobbing. She was covered in crystal dust, but she was unharmed. "Lucille!" Bumpy shouted. Aunt Lucille crawled out from under the table. "I'm here, Bumpy. I'm here." "Take her," Bumpy said, handing Elise to her. "Take her to the office in the back. Lock the door. Put the safe in front of it. Do not open it for anyone but me or Mamie. Go." Lucille grabbed the child and ran, weaving through the overturned chairs. Bumpy watched them go. Once the door to the office clicked shut, the father vanished. The king returned. He brushed the glass shards from his shoulders. He walked over to Mamie. She hadn't moved. She was in shock, the adrenaline dump leaving her frozen. Bumpy reached out and took her hands. They were ice cold. He looked at her gloves. The right one was stained with blood. "Mamie," Bumpy whispered. "Look at me." She looked up. Her eyes were huge, dark pools of terror. I didn't say cheese, Ellsworth. Bumpy pulled her into his chest. He held her tight, kissing her forehead. You did good, baby. You did good. He held her for a second, letting her feel his heartbeat, letting her know he was alive. Then he pulled back. He needed her to be strong for one more hour. Are you hurt? Bumpy asked. No, Mamie said, her voice strengthening. She looked at the blood on her glove. It's his. Bumpy nodded. He turned to the room. The silence that followed the chaos was heavy, filled with the click of revolver hammers being cocked. The Italians were watching him. This was a dangerous moment. An assassination attempt on Bumpy Johnson in a room full of rival bosses could easily turn into a massacre if someone panicked. Bumpy walked to the center of the room. He raised his hands. Everybody stay calm, Bumpy said. His voice was steady, projecting authority to the back of the room. The threat is contained. My wife just canceled the entertainment. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, mostly from the sheer relief of being alive. Fat Tony Salerno stepped forward, kicking a piece of crystal out of his way. He looked at the assassin pinned under Big Sam. He looked at the shattered camera. Then he looked at Bumpy. Bumpy, Tony said, his voice gravelly. You got a hell of a guardian angel. I got a wife, Tony, Bumpy corrected. There's a difference. Tony nodded respectfully. This didn't come from us, Bumpy. You know that. We don't miss. I know, Bumpy said. If it was you, I'd be dead. Bumpy walked over to the wreckage of the buffet table. Big Sam had the assassin pinned, his knee on the man's chest. Mr. Vale was moaning, his hand a mangled mess of blood and broken fingers. Bumpy looked down at him. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. Pick him up, Bumpy said. Bring him to the kitchen. And bring that camera. Junie Bird scooped up the speed graphic. He handled it carefully. The steak knife was still embedded in the side, wedged between the leather bellows and the flash bracket. Boss, Junie said, examining it. Look at this. He pointed to the front of the camera. The lens was shattered by the fall, but underneath the glass, the dark, hollow barrel of a gun was visible. It's a .38, Junie said. Rigged to the shutter release. The flash is supposed to hide the muzzle flare, but because you hit him, the flashbulb didn't fire. Just the gun. Junie looked at the chandelier, then back at where Bumpy had been standing. It was a hard shot, Bumpy. Dead center. Bumpy looked at the camera. He looked at the knife sticking out of it. It was one of Mamie's good silver steak knives. He remembered buying them for her. Bring it, Bumpy said. He turned to the guests. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Please, finish your drinks. The house is buying. But nobody leaves until we know who sent this little rat. Bumpy, Junie, and Big Sam dragged the assassin into the kitchen. The double doors swung shut, sealing off the screams from the dining room. The kitchen of the Flash Inn was stark white, smelling of bleach and lobster bisque. It was a place of preparation, but tonight it was an interrogation room. Big Sam threw Mr. Vale onto a stainless steel prep table. The man screamed as his broken hand hit the metal. He curled into a ball, shivering. He was small, pathetic. Stripped of his camera and his element of surprise, he was just a man in a cheap suit who had made a very bad mistake. Bumpy leaned against the counter. He took a towel and wiped a smudge of crystal dust from his lapel. He lit a cigar, the flame illuminating the hard lines of his face. "What's your name?" Bumpy asked calmly. "Vale," the man wheezed. Looking Vale." "That's a lie," Junie said, stepping forward. He ripped the press badge off the man's jacket. "This badge is a fake. I checked the Amsterdam News. They don't have a Vale on payroll." "Who sent you?" Bumpy asked. He took a drag of the cigar and blew the smoke toward the ceiling fans. I don't know, the man sobbed. It was a phone call, a locker key. The money was in a locker at Penn Station. $5,000. $5,000, Bumpy mused. That's the price of a king these days? Inflation is terrible. Bumpy walked over to the table. He grabbed the man's good hand, the right one. He placed it flat on the steel. You tried to kill me, Bumpy said softly. That's the business. I accept that. But you tried to kill me while I was holding my daughter. Bumpy's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You pointed a loaded weapon at a 4-year-old girl. You were going to shoot through her to get to me. No, the man cried. I waited for a clear shot, but you wouldn't put her down. So you decided she was collateral damage, Bumpy said. He nodded to Big Sam. Big Sam grabbed a meat tenderizer, a heavy, spiked aluminum mallet from the rack. He slammed it down on the table, inches from the man's head. The sound rang like a bell. Talk, Sam growled. I told you, the assassin screamed. I don't have a name. It was a blind drop. But there was a note. A note? Bumpy asked. In the locker, with the money. It said, Happy Anniversary. Bumpy went still. Happy Anniversary, Bumpy repeated. It wasn't just a hit. It was a message. Someone knew the date. Someone knew exactly what tonight meant. Someone wanted to turn his greatest triumph into a funeral. Where is the note? Junie asked, rifling through the man's pockets. I burned it. I had to. Junie pulled out a wallet. He flipped it open. No ID, just cash. And, hey boss, look at this. Junie pulled out a ticket stub. It was a train ticket from Philadelphia, dated yesterday. Philly, Bumpy said. We don't have beef in Philly. Maybe hired talent? Junie suggested. Someone imported him so we wouldn't recognize him? Bumpy looked at the assassin. He looked at the camera sitting on the counter. The knife was still wedged in it. Whispers, Bumpy said. Yeah, boss? Whispers. The tech expert who had been cowering near the dishwasher stepped forward. This camera, Bumpy said. It's a modified speed graphic. The gun is mounted below the lens board, right? Yeah, looks like it. So the lens was still clear, Bumpy said, thinking back to the moment. Did the shutter click? Did it take a picture? Whispers looked at the mangled device. The trigger mechanism is linked to the shutter. If he pulled the trigger to fire the gun, the shutter would have opened at the exact same millisecond. Even though the knife broke the flash, the plate should have exposed. Bumpy looked at the camera with a new intensity. So there's a picture, Bumpy said, inside that box. A picture of the moment he fired. Probably, Whispers said, unless the knife broke the light seal. But the film plate is in the back. It might still be intact. Develop it, Bumpy ordered. Here? Now? The dark room is in the basement, Bumpy said. Go down there. Process that plate. I want to see what he saw. I want to see exactly what happened in that second. Whispers grabbed the camera and ran for the service stairs. Bumpy turned back to the assassin. The man was passing out from the pain in his hand. Tie him up, Bumpy said to Sam. Put him in the freezer. Let him cool off. We are done with him. Bumpy walked out of the kitchen, back into the dining room. The guests were still there, frozen in a tableau of anxiety. When Bumpy entered, a ripple of relief went through the room. The king was still standing. He walked over to Mamie. She was sitting at a table, sipping a brandy that Chin Gigante had poured for her. She looked pale, but her hands had stopped shaking. Is he dead? Mamie asked quietly. No, Bumpy said. He's singing, but he doesn't know the tune yet. He sat down next to her. He took her gloved hand, the one with the blood, and kissed it. "You saved us, Mamie," Bumpy said. "You saw what nobody else saw." "He was holding it wrong," Mamie whispered. "His hand was inside the camera, and he was sweating. Bumpy, he was looking at Elise like she wasn't even there, like she was just furniture." Bumpy's face hardened. "I know." Just then, the basement door burst open. Whispers came running into the dining room. He was holding a wet, dripping photograph by the corner. He looked terrified. "Bumpy!" Whispers shouted. "You gotta see this!" The room went silent. Bumpy stood up. Mamie stood up. Whispers ran over to the table. He laid the wet print down on the white tablecloth, right next to the spilled wine and the shattered crystal. "It came out," Whispers breathed. "The knife broke the bellows, so there's a light leak on the side. But the center is clear." Bumpy looked down at the photo. It was a haunting, high-contrast black and white image. The angle was slightly low, looking up from the photographer's waist level. In the center of the frame was Bumpy. He was smiling, holding Elise. He looked completely oblivious, a happy man in a tuxedo. But next to him was a blur of silver and white. Mamie. The camera had caught her in mid-strike. Her face was not the face of the gracious hostess. It was the face of a lioness. Her teeth were bared, her eyes were wide with fury. The white napkin was falling away, suspended in the air like a ghost. And in her hand, clear as day, was the steak knife. It was a picture of a murder being prevented. It was a picture of a wife killing to save her husband. But that wasn't what made Bumpy's blood run cold. "Look at the background," Whispers said, pointing to the edge of the frame near the buffet table. Bumpy leaned in. In the background of the photo, amidst the blurred faces of the guests, there was one face that was in sharp focus. A man standing directly behind the photographer, looking over his shoulder. He wasn't reaching for his gun. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was looking at Bumpy. And he was holding a napkin up to his face, as if to hide a smile or a signal. It was Big Sam. Bumpy stared at the photo. He stared at the massive bodyguard who had been entrusted with the floor security, the man who had tackled the assassin moments ago. In the photo, Sam wasn't eating. He was watching the hit go down. Bumpy slowly raised his head. He looked across the room to the kitchen door. Big Sam was standing there, guarding the prisoner. He looked back at Bumpy. He saw the photo on the table. He saw the look in Bumpy's eyes. And for the first time in 10 years, Bumpy didn't see a protector. He saw a predator. "Sam," Bumpy whispered. The silence in the room stretched to the breaking point. The photo lay on the table, wet and damning. The hidden hand had been revealed, but it wasn't just Mamie's hand holding the knife. It was the hand holding the door open for the devil. Sam wasn't rushing to save his boss in the photo. He wasn't reaching for his gun. He was standing with his arms folded, watching the assassin line up the shot. It was the stance of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen and had decided to let it play out. Bumpy felt a coldness spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Big Sam had been with him since the beginning. Sam had carried Bumpy's money. Sam had driven his car. Sam had eaten at his table. "Bumpy?" Mamie whispered, following his gaze. She looked at the photo, then at the massive man standing by the kitchen door. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, he let him in." Bumpy slowly lifted his head. He adjusted his cufflinks. He brushed a speck of invisible dust from his tuxedo jacket. "Stay here," Bumpy said to her. His voice was void of emotion. It was dead. He picked up the wet photograph. He stepped away from the table. The room parted for him. The guests, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, backed away. The air crackled with a static charge. Even Fat Tony Salerno and Chin Gigante, men who commanded armies, went silent. They knew what a betrayal looked like. They knew the smell of it. Bumpy walked toward the kitchen. Big Sam watched him come. The giant man didn't run. He didn't reach for his weapon. He just stood there, his face a mask of stone. He knew Bumpy. He knew that running was useless. "Sam," Bumpy said softly when he was 3 feet away. "Boss," Sam replied. His voice was steady, deep as a cavern. "Step aside," Bumpy said. "I can't do that, boss," Sam said. "I said step aside," Bumpy repeated. "I want to talk to the prisoner." "You don't need to talk to him, Bumpy," Sam said, shifting his weight. "He already told us everything. Philadelphia, the locker key. He's just a hired gun." "Is he?" Bumpy asked, holding up the photograph. "Or is he the only one who knows who hired him?" Sam looked at the photo. He didn't flinch. "Pictures can be tricky, boss," Sam said. "Angles and shadows." "This isn't a shadow," Bumpy said. "This is you, Sam, watching a stranger point a gun at my daughter." Sam looked at Bumpy. He looked at the Italian bosses watching from the tables. He looked at Junie Bird, who was standing by the bar, realizing what was happening, his hand drifting toward his .45. Sam sighed. It was a heavy, resigned sound. "You got soft, Bumpy," Sam said quietly. "The last few years of playing politician. You forgot to feed the wolves." "So you decided to eat?" Bumpy asked. "The Bronx crew made an offer," Sam said, shrugging. 50,000, cash, and my own territory on 145th Street. All I had to do was look the other way for 10 seconds. 50,000, Bumpy repeated. "You sold my life. You sold my daughter's life for $50,000? "It's business, Bumpy," Sam said. "You always said it's just business." "Not when it's family," Bumpy said. Sam reached into his jacket. He was fast for a big man. He pulled a snub-nosed .38, but Junie Bird was faster. "Drop it!" Junie screamed from the bar. Bang! Junie didn't wait. He fired a single shot from his Colt .45. The bullet struck Sam in the right shoulder, spinning him around. Sam grunted, dropping his gun, clutching his arm. He crashed into the kitchen door, sliding down to the floor. The room erupted in screams again. The Italians drew their weapons. "Stand down!" Bumpy roared, turning to the room. "Nobody interferes. This is house business." Bumpy walked over to Sam. The big man was panting, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked up at Bumpy with eyes that were no longer defiant, just tired. "You missed my heart, Junie," Sam wheezed, looking past Bumpy. "I wasn't aiming for your heart," Junie said, walking over, his gun still raised. "I wanted you awake." Bumpy stood over Sam. He looked at the man who had protected him for a decade. He felt a profound sense of waste. "Why, Sam?" Bumpy asked. "You sat at my table. You held my child." "I was hungry, Bumpy," Sam whispered. "A dog gets tired of table scraps." Bumpy shook his head. "You weren't a dog, Sam. You were a brother. But you're right about one thing. I did get soft." Bumpy leaned down. He picked up Sam's gun from the floor. He emptied the cylinder, letting the bullets scatter on the tile. He tossed the empty gun onto Sam's chest. "I'm not going to kill you," Bumpy said. Sam looked confused. "What?" "Death is easy," Bumpy said. "And if I kill you here, in front of everyone, you become a story. A soldier who died gun in hand." Bumpy stood up. He looked at the Italians. He looked at the judges. He looked at the waiters. Listen to me, Bumpy shouted to the room. This man, Big Sam, is no longer with us. He is not dead. He is something worse. Bumpy pointed at Sam. He is excommunicated. From this moment on, he does not exist in Harlem. No man will do business with him. No woman will speak to him. No store will sell to him. If he walks down the street, you look through him like he is glass. Bumpy looked down at Sam. You wanted territory? You have nothing. You wanted money? Your money is no good here. You leave this city tonight, Sam. You walk out that door and you keep walking. Because if I ever see your face again, if I ever hear your name, then Junie won't aim for the shoulder. Sam stared at Bumpy. To be exiled, to be stripped of his rank, his home, and his reputation was a fate worse than a bullet. He was being erased. Go, Bumpy whispered. Sam struggled to his feet. He clutched his bleeding shoulder. He looked around the room. He saw no sympathy. Even the waiters looked at him with disgust. He had broken the code. He had endangered a child. Sam limped toward the back exit. He pushed through the kitchen doors, leaving a trail of blood drops on the white floor. The alley door slammed shut behind him. Bumpy stood there for a long moment. He felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. The celebration was ruined. The trust was broken. But he was alive. He turned back to the room. Music, Bumpy said to the band leader. The band hesitated, then struck up a slow, mournful blues number. Bumpy walked back to the head table. Mamie was standing there. She looked at him. She didn't ask if Sam was dead. She knew Bumpy's justice. Is it over? She asked. For tonight, Bumpy said. He picked up the wet photograph from the table. He looked at it one last time. The image of betrayal. He handed it to Junie, who had walked up beside him. Burn it, Bumpy said. Bumpy, Junie said, his voice shaking. I should have seen it. I was at the bar. I should have been watching him. Bumpy put a hand on Junie's shoulder. He squeezed tight. You were watching the door, Junie. You did your job. Mamie was watching the room. She did hers. Bumpy looked at his wife. And I was watching the dream. He took Mamie's hand. He led her out of the dining room, away from the shattered glass and the spilled wine. Where are we going? Mamie asked. To the back office, Bumpy said. I need to see Elise. They found Elise in the office, sitting on Aunt Lucille's lap, drawing with crayons on the back of a menu. She looked up when they entered. Daddy! She cheered. Did the loud noise stop? Bumpy knelt down. He hugged her so tight his ribs hurt. Yeah, baby. The noise stopped. It's quiet now. He looked at Mamie over his daughter's shoulder. Let's go home, Bumpy said. A week later, the flash-in had been repaired. The chandelier was replaced. The gossip on the street was that Big Sam had been seen in Chicago, working as a bouncer in a dive bar, a ghost of the man he used to be. Bumpy Johnson sat in his study at Lenox Terrace. On his desk sat a new picture frame. It was silver, simple and elegant. Inside was a copy of the photograph. Whispers had made one print before destroying the negative. It was cropped. Big Sam had been cut out of the frame. The betrayal was gone. All that remained was the center of the image, Bumpy, smiling, holding Elise. And Mamie. The blur of motion, the white napkin falling, the glint of the knife, the ferocity in her eyes. It was a portrait of love in its rawest form. Love not as a sentiment, but as an action. The door to the study opened. Mamie walked in. She was wearing a simple house dress, holding a cup of coffee. She looked tired, but peaceful. She saw him looking at the photo. You kept it, she said. I framed it, Bumpy corrected. Mamie walked over and looked at the picture. She shivered slightly. I look like a monster. No, Bumpy said, standing up and taking her hand. You look like a queen. He kissed her palm, the palm that had gripped the knife. They call me the Godfather, Bumpy said softly. They think I run this city. But they don't know the truth, Mamie. They don't know that the only reason the king sits on the throne is because the queen watches the room. Mamie smiled. She rested her head on his shoulder. I will always watch the room, Ellsworth, she whispered. I know, Bumpy said. And Junie watches the door. He looked out the window at Harlem. His city. His kingdom. It was a dangerous place. There were wolves on every corner. But as he looked at the photo of their survival, Bumpy Johnson knew one thing for sure. He wasn't afraid, because he knew what his wife was hiding in her hand. And he knew that as long as she was holding it, he was invincible. Bumpy turned off the desk lamp. Come on, he said. Let's go have breakfast with Elise. Family only? Mamie asked. Family only, Bumpy said. They walked out of the study, leaving the photo on the desk, a silent warning to anyone who would dare to cross the Johnson family, and a permanent reminder that in Harlem, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun. It's a wife who loves her husband enough to kill for him. Thanks for listening, folks. If you liked that video and want more, be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss any Bumpy Johnson stories.